Okay, we're not live yet, obviously, right?
Correct, we're not live.
But if you can fix this, I don't understand. I've never had a problem where I couldn't see everybody.
Well, I could. It's going to take some time, and we're on a time. Go ahead and roll with it today. What I'll do is, instead of counting you down, I'm just going to press live. It'll take a couple seconds, and I'll hit your theme song, and we'll get it rolling from there. You ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. One moment. Once you hear your theme song, you're good to go.
And now, the most trusted name in radio, serving the Treasure Coast for over 30 years, Rhett Palmer, the mayor of the airways.
All right, this is the mayor of the airways. How you doing, folks? And today I have Brandon Showalter. He's with the Christian Post, calling in from Washington, D.C. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Rhett. It's good to join you today.
Okay, now I can see you. It's nice to see you. And you'll notice that the other fellow is Pastor John Robbins, and he's a pastor of an Anglican church, very successful one in Vero Beach, Florida. And I invited him in because this is a very important subject about the pedophilia. And you have a national podcast, as well as, of course, you're a reporter for this very successful Christian newspaper out of Washington. Tell us just a wee bit about yourself, if you would.
Well, yes, my name, as I said, is Brandon Showalter, and I've been a journalist with the Christian Post since the summer of 2016. And since the fall of 2022, I've been the co-producer and host of our documentary podcast series called Generation Indoctrination: Inside the Transgender Battle. And we are currently in the middle of releasing our 5th season, and we've won a few awards from the Evangelical Press Association for this series. And so it documents in granular detail what's been going on in the gender ideology space. As many people know, that was quite an issue that animated the past election, but even in recent years before that, that really sort of entered the public consciousness with a lot of fervor. But we have been reporting on it ever since I joined the team here in 2016. That was kind of the first rabbit hole I fell down. But before anybody was really aware of what was going on in these dark corners of the world and in hospitals, and what had been going on very stealthily in the shadows for many years was finally uncovered. And we were part of the few publications in this country that was doing that original shoe leather reporting, exposing what was going on across the board, especially in the medical arena, but really across all of society. And so I dug in on that.
Sure. I was talking to Doolin Dalton, who's our engineer. Good morning, Doolin. You can't see him, folks, but he's behind the scenes is producing this. He used the word disturbing. And I went, oh, man, what an apropos word, what an appropriate word, because that's how I felt last night listening to your podcast. I found it, frankly, overwhelming. Let's introduce Pastor John Robbins. Good morning, Pastor John Robbins.
Good morning, Rhett. Good morning, Brandon.
Morning.
Thank you for coming in at the last minute to co-host this with me. I figure John probably has more experience in this area than I do. Also, Pastor John is the father, I believe, of 2 boys and 1 girl, or is it 2 girls and 1 boy?
Yeah, 2 girls and 1 boy. Our son is a pastor, and our 2 girls are very strongly active and working in ministry.
Wonderful. All right, so really the ball's in your court, Brandon. Where should we start?
Well, I would encourage everyone to give our documentary podcast a listen, particularly the episode that we just released.
Yes.
On Friday, and I am happy to explore a few elements of that story, because it's not a story that has gotten near enough attention, though it has been reported in a few outlets, especially since last July.
Okay, listen. Tell how can people find that? Doolin's in the other room, I know, but he could maybe write something up for you and put that on the screen, either under you or between all of us, so it's constantly there. How people can find this very important podcast of yours.
Our landing page at the Christian Post for the podcast is generationindoctrination.com. But you can also access the documentary podcast where you get your podcasts. Spotify, Apple iTunes, all the major platforms should have it. It's riveting listening, if I do say so myself. But particularly this latest episode is an especially important story in light of the outsized role that the state of Alabama has played in bringing about the reckoning that we are now seeing over these issues. Alabama was the second state in the country to prohibit legally the chemical and surgical mutilation and sterilization of children in the transgender space. And that their state actually went so far as to add criminal penalties to the doctors who do those things to children. But as a result of their law, the Biden administration sued the state of Alabama. And what makes this story unique is that Alabama stands out in that its Attorney General's office did some of the most important legal work and investigations into what was going on here, that it was really it really caused the jaws of so many people in my world to just drop because of what they were able to find. And so
you want to believe it's not true.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I found this very disturbing last night, and it's like, oh my word! In the book of Genesis, as you know, it says God repented of having made man. And when I listened to this, I found it so down to the bone. It was like, I'm just overwhelmed that this is actually going on. And where does this pedophilia see it? Paul said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities of light and darkness.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I just can't imagine how would somebody ever, I don't know how this all goes down, this evil that seems to occupy, it's like almost like demonic possession.
Yeah, I've had a number of people who are not even Christians, as I've been working in this space, reach out to me and say, I'm not even sure I believe in God, but I think I believe in demons now because of the depravity they've seen with children being sterilized and teenagers having their body parts amputated, literally, and just the havoc that this wreaks on families causes a lot of people to revisit what they believe about good and evil. But I'll say, you mentioned pedophilia. There is context to that, and I'm happy to share a few bits, but the state of Alabama, here's just the basic background. Like I said, they passed a law in 2022. They were the second state in the nation to do so. It was very strong, added criminal penalties to doctors who do these awful things to children. A lot of us wondered if that criminal penalty that they added would it withstand judicial scrutiny, because laws like this are going to be contested in the courts. Well, believe it or not, it actually did withstand the court challenge, and the 11th Circuit of the Court of Appeals did uphold Alabama's law. But as I mentioned, the Biden administration did sue the state of Alabama, and during the discovery process, the Attorney General of Alabama and his team found that the main advocacy organization that styles itself as a medical group, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, that their guidelines, that was the target, because those guidelines have been co-opted into all the other mainstream medical organizations, and judges were being convinced that, well, this is just clinical best practice. The Attorney General's office rightly discerned that those guidelines were just junk science, and so they really went after that. And they found out that in the drafting of the 8th version of these guidelines from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, that it was all political. That the people that were putting together these guidelines they wanted to win lawsuits, they wanted to affect policy, they really weren't looking out for the best interests and the health of children who may have been traumatized and were thus confused about their bodies. That was exposed in emails, and it was also exposed that Rachel Levine, the number 2 guy at the Health and Human Services Department, a man who claims to be a woman, also urged that WPATH not include age limits for any of these transgender medical procedures. So he was actually arguing for doing this, allowing the guidelines to do this for children with no age restrictions. That came out the last week of June. And on June 27th, this was last year, June 27th, that was the day people will remember that President Biden fell apart in the debate, which ultimately led to his exit from the presidential race. Well, that morning, the Biden administration put out a statement for the first time in the entire presidency that said that they don't support gender surgeries, like the amputation of genitals or breasts, on children. That was the first time they had made any criticism of anything transgender. They were the most pro-trans, pro-LGBTQ presidency in memory.
Well, let me ask you this though.
Yeah.
Remember what you were going to say.
Yeah.
Is that okay? So I'm befuddled that people can do what they do and all this stuff. And I remember seeing this young lady recently. She's on TV crying, and she said, "I was confused about my gender.
Yeah.
Now they've taken off her little young breasts.
Yeah.
She's now maybe 19 or 20.
Yeah.
Her life that she feels is ruined." Now, and secondly, I remember seeing President Biden on TV, and he was always petting the children. Remember before that went down, before he was accused?
Yeah.
And nicely. And I think maybe I'm thinking, because I was saying, oh, it's so grandfatherly, loving. But you know what? If you had a child and you were standing in front of me for a group photo, as we caught Biden, if I started to, I could see touching my own granddaughter or someone who's close to me. But let's say you're there and I start to whisper in her ear and rub her hair. It just was over the top. It seems like, you know what I mean? And so in other words, what I'm thinking of, let's say Biden's one of these people. Okay. He may not be, but let's say he is. So they actually don't see the evil in it. They actually think that they're, I guess, kind and loving people. They're so deluded or blinded by the devil himself.
Well, I think the important thing, aside from anything about Biden's interactions with those young people, the important thing to understand about the current left-wing Democratic mind is that they see all of these transgender issues through the lens of civil rights. So it's sort of psychologically in the same vein of Martin Luther King and, the Selma Bridge, people who crossed the bridge, the lunch counters, the sit-ins, the freedom riders. That's how they think about this, because they are on this progressive arc of ever increasing civil rights victories. That's kind of the track they're walking on, and so they can't break out of that. That's sort of the single prism, as Christopher Rupo put it, through which they're looking at this.
At the same time, I've been watching. I'm in the throes of being addicted right now to the Lincoln, the new Abraham Lincoln documentary, PBS. It's available on Netflix. I almost didn't watch it because I've seen so many motion pictures on Lincoln. I thought, oh, this is another one. I have to say this. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but it's so much superior to what Spielberg did.
Yeah.
This is so well executed. Well, I feel that just like he was fighting real evil, I feel that, guys like you are like, this is like civil war among humanity and non-humanity.
It's pretty brutal. And I'll just continue. I mean, just to underscore the point I was making, even during the recent court oral arguments for U.S. versus Scrimeti, which, as you know, probably read, was Tennessee's law that was being contested at the U.S. Supreme Court that had banned puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries on children in Tennessee. This was in December when oral arguments were given, and then in June.
What is a puberty blocker? What is that?
The puberty blockers are drugs like Lupron or triptorelin that halt the natural pubertal processes in children, that they use sometimes for precocious puberty, a medical condition, but they use it in gender-confused children in order to halt the development of their bodies so that they can then drug them further to make them look like the opposite sex.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, it's pretty awful. So but one of the justices, liberal justices, Ketanji Brown Jackson, actually compared Tennessee's law banning these medical procedures to a law that, 1967 interracial marriage bans. And so Loving versus Virginia was the 1967 case at the Supreme Court, which overturned mixed race marriage bans. And so, but that's, like I say, that single prism. They see all of these LGBTQ plus issues in the same vein as Black civil rights. That's where it sort of occupies that space in their mind. To return to what I was saying about Alabama, that morning of the debate when Biden fell apart and ultimately exited the presidential race, that his administration put out a statement saying they didn't support gender surgeries on minors.
Yeah.
And I thought that maybe that was because President Trump was going to bring it up at the debate that night and say, try to give Biden a hard time about it. And so was he saying out a statement to try to get ahead of the issue in light of President Trump possibly bringing up? Now, President Trump didn't bring it up that night. He didn't have to. And so the more likely outcome was that they were trying to respond to Rachel Levine, who it had been exposed that week that he was arguing against age restrictions for any of these transgender medical procedures and that kind of thing. But that actually did end up, it did end up being a consequential issue in the election. And ever since that time, we've seen a slew of actions from federal agencies. Some funding's been stripped and gender clinics are starting to close. But the Alabama case was really just so important, and that's the subject of this second installment of the 5th season of our documentary podcast, because what they were able to do was expose the corruption within the transgender activist spaces that have taken over all of our institutions. And with respect to the pedophilic aspect, it was documented in the Attorney General of Alabama's brief to the Supreme Court in the Scrimeti case, which was about Tennessee's law. They were basically arguing that the High Court should side with Tennessee and allow that law banning these procedures to stand, which it did. But in that amicus, they documented what they found during their investigations in their lawsuit that the Biden administration had found out. That they told the story of what they went through in Alabama, and one of the things they cited was the fact that in the development of these transgender activist guidelines that are now used by the American Academy of Pediatrics and all these other groups, is that eunuchs are a type of gender. In the guidelines, they actually call eunuchs a gender. And so where did they get the idea that a eunuch is a type of a gendered person? Well, the answer, if you can believe it, is in a perverse corner of the internet in chat rooms where these fetishistic castration enthusiast men, academics and others, congregate in this sordid website, and they swap written pornography that has child abuse and all kinds of perversion, castration as its dominant themes. And those men who are congregating on that filthy website, it has been proven that they were contributing health guidelines and input to the World Professional Association for Transgender Health.
Why do they want castration? That's the removal of the testicles on a boy.
Right.
Can they?
They are obsessed with castration, and it's just I have it's just kind of one of those unfettered, perverse kind of things, and I fail to understand what it's about. But when you see perverts like that who are, I mean, it gets so much worse, but they actually contributed to the formation of clinical guidelines for gender confused children. And so when you see that, that's not based in science at all. But that was actually documented in the Supreme Court. The Alabama Attorney General actually deposed one of the main writers of those guidelines, and he flat out asked him, if someone comes into your office, I'm paraphrasing, someone comes into your office and they self-declared themselves a eunuch, but they are at no risk for self-castration, is the appropriate course of treatment for them to be physically castrated? And the lead writer of the guidelines responded, that's correct. So they got it from the horse's mouth. Like it's all documented. If I'm not a person that typically likes to read amicus briefs to the High Court, but Alabama's amicus brief to the Scrimeti case is a barn burner, and I would encourage everyone to read it. I wrote a column about it some months ago. It's jaw-dropping, the kinds of filth and perversion that their Attorney General's office, Steve Marshall, was able to uncover, and the dogged attorneys in his office.
This is crazy.
Job. Yeah, and that is told. If you go to generationindoctrination.com, you'll hear the full story of what Alabama did, both from the lawmaker who got their bill passed and then all the journey that took, a plastic surgeon who's been, one of the champions of evidence-based medicine who's been speaking out about this, and Attorney General Steve Marshall himself. I interview all three, and you'll get the full story.
Wow. Now, Pastor John Robbins, are you taking all this in? Are you following it? You find it overwhelming like I do?
Sadly, I don't find it overwhelming. I think that, evil is such that there's really no bounds to it. And of course, Jesus says, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, of the kingdom of heaven is made of such as these. And so if Jesus sets children apart as absolutely precious and sacred in some ways, that the devil would do everything in his power to try to kill, steal, and destroy children. in one way or another. And of course, we know that it's not just affecting children, but really, I think that they are the target in this whole thing. So it doesn't surprise me, sadly. It doesn't surprise me. And I've although I haven't heard Brandon's podcast, I certainly will go to it as soon as I can. I've heard many reports of this kind of thing, and of course they're so quickly written off as conspiracy theories. But over time, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've heard so many conspiracy theories that have ultimately proven to be true.
Yeah.
That you can't help but question a lot of what you're hearing in the scientific community. And so anyway, I think the scientific community has been deeply damaged, over the past 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, this is it's like Doolin Dalton said this morning when he used the word disturbing, and I was like, yes, that's the appropriate word. It disturbed me so much that's why I invited you to come in and co-host at the last minute. Thank you, because I'm just befuddled over this. It's just, I go, no wonder God in Genesis said that he repented of having made man.
Yeah, but and I get it, Rhett, and yet being in ministry, I've seen some very evil things. I've seen the demonic at work, and once you've had a personal experience, personal encounter with the demonic, you know that anything is possible. And so as awful as this all sounds, in some ways it sounds very consistent to me with how the demonic works.
How is your newspaper handling all this? Are they in your corner, allowing you carte blanche on all this stuff?
My editors have been wonderful. They've stood behind me the entire time. I'm not the only reporter that has gone after this. All of our colleagues are very good on these issues. They understand the biblical view of sexuality, gender, how we are made, creation, Genesis 1. Those are our core values, and so that really does help. I do know of other journalists, though, that have had a very hard time, who they see the same things that we see, even if they're not Christians, and the ideological capture of their newsrooms does not allow criticism to get through to the public. I mean, one of the reasons this has gone on for so long is that the mainstream press has been the sort of the phalanx, protective phalanx around.
Yes.
I mean, the gender industry, as I sometimes call it. We would not be seeing girls as young as 12 and 13 have their breasts cut off had the media done their jobs and actually reported this, because in fact they lie and they run interference for these doctors who they'll say, oh, that's not happening, or it's happening to so few, why do you care? They'll gaslight. It's been awful. I remember, especially in 2022, the summer, when Boston Children's Hospital, which is the site of the first ever pediatric gender clinic to open in the United States in 2007, when their videos were exposed that, yeah, they were doing these things to children. And then it was just this slew of sympathetic media coverage, and the mayor of Boston came out, oh, that's not happening. This is healthcare for children. They just lie, 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 lie. And I got so angry, I spent part of my weekend just making a list of boom, 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 where coherent, just medical journals, peer-reviewed documentation. This is not, right-wing media. This is like the Journal of Clinical Medicine, the Lancet, Obstetric and Gynecology, the Journal of Sexual Medicine, documented page numbers, chart tables showing from the gender clinicians' mouths themselves saying that, yes, we are doing these things to children. We're cutting off the genitals of 15 and 16-year-old boys. We're amputating the breasts of 13-year-old girls. It's in their own words. And so I made a list of just, here you go. This is the original source material. You say this isn't happening. Well, I have the receipts proving otherwise. It's been so frustrating because of the wall of lies we have had to punch through just to get that information out there to the public that, yes, it is happening. And no, you're not crazy for seeing what you're seeing. Because finally people have woken up, it seems. And the administration now and all the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, the Health and Human Services Department have all taken action against these practices, and it could not be a more stark contrast from the previous 4 years.
You're doing great work, Brandon.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is quite bringing up the this journalism thing. When I grew up, I always considered journalists to be the watchdog organizations. I know they always skewed, even as a young guy, towards the left, but nonetheless, I thought I could absolutely trust them. I mean, it was Sam Donaldson, who I believe was probably on the left. He was a very famous reporter, I think NBC, and he's the one that found out that Biden, back in 1988, had lied and said that he had 3 degrees. He was the top of his class. And Sam Donaldson approached him. He was running for the presidency back in 1988 and said, "Sir, you said you had 3 degrees. It turns out you only have 1. You said you were in the top of your class. You were actually in the bottom of your class." And he confronted Biden. Maybe that's why we don't hear about Sam Donaldson anymore, but he confronted Biden, and Biden had to step out of the race. But what they do then, these evil guys, like I guess he's turning out to be, they step aside, disappear for a year or two. The public forgets and they come right back in, and as if nothing happened whatsoever. And so what I'm concerned about now, may I ask you this, Brandon, how old are you?
40.
Okay, you're 40. So, I'm 71. So you're the generation behind Pastor John and myself. And I'm very hopeful that something new, either you or even some of the people coming up under you, younger than you. I'm an optimist. I believe that the pendulum has swung this way. I think that your generation is going to come up with some sort of a safety net or something, or maybe you'll have to get a certain title given to you that you are a bona fide, objective journalist who vows, like a doctor does, to tell the truth, whether you like it or not. And I just don't know how corrupt this goes. We know about who's that real ugly man that puts up all the money that supports the far extreme left, the billionaire.
George Soros.
Yes. And so, I mean, I don't know how, I mean, let's say I'm a young journalist like you, Brandon, and all of a sudden, I'm making 150,000 a year, or $2,000, 100 grand, whatever it is you all get paid when you're at the top of your craft. And the guy says to me, "Hey, Rhett, you're not going to put that on TV tonight or on your show, because if you do, you're fired. And how are you going to feed your 3 young children?" Okay, boss, whatever you say, I got to do.
Yeah. No, it does take a ruthless commitment to the truth, no matter how inconvenient it may be. And, I'll tell you, the gender horror that I've spent an inordinate amount of time covering is, in one way, it's very, very hard, because it's just so brutal and ugly and depraved, and staring into that abyss is just hard no matter what. But my editors do have integrity. What's harder still, I will say, is when you have to confront things within the church, and where it takes more courage actually to go up against the people that you think are your friends. And I mean, I was one of the reporters that was reporting on the Ravi Zacharias scandal years ago, and let me tell you, when I was reporting on some of those things where it was nobody expected that he was the character that he was, and I was getting the evidence that he really wasn't who a lot of people said he was, and I was reporting a lot of that difficult material, I got some hate mail from Christians, let me tell you. And so
let me ask you this. Now,
yeah,
I met that guy. He came in to speak at our annual prayer breakfast here in Vero Beach, Florida. And I think he died, right? And
he did in 2020.
What was I don't keep up with gossip. So what was revealed about this guy?
Well, there were several things, and it first emerged in 2017. I actually had a sit-down interview with him as well in May of that year, and then months later, it became clear. It was actually an atheist guy by the name of Steve Boffman, who I still consider a friend, and we still talk every once in a while, that he had inflated his credentials, that he had misrepresented who he was academically. There was a lot of sort of credential falsification and misrepresentation. But then it was also that he had engaged in sexual impropriety, and it even got worse. So there was a woman by the name of Lorianne Thompson that he'd made a suicide threat because he had been in an online relationship with that was very exploitative and improper. And then it was exposed that he was in a massage parlor doing really disturbing sexual things with people that work there. And that's, I'll just be polite here on the air, but it was ugly. It all kind of came out forensically documented by Julie Roys, and then other reporting at Christianity Today. But at the time, I was sort of on the earlier side in 2017 and that time when earlier stuff came out. And then as things dribbled out, it eventually came out. But a lot of it wasn't fully revealed until after his death in 2020. But that was not an easy thing to report on. And I've reported on other situations where it's people that generally have the same worldview as you, but are in fact kind of conniving. They're narcissistic, but they have the wool over people's eyes, and it's hard to hold people accountable that are otherwise believers in the same core values that you hold, but are in fact wolves in sheep's clothing. And that's not fun. I mean, reporting on the transgender horror is a piece of cake compared to that. So, but it's that same dogged, ruthless commitment to the truth that you have to have no matter what, whether it's people who think like you or people who don't.
Let me be clear, Brandon. Everything you said about Ravi Zacharias, I totally agree with. The problem was he did so many good things for the body of Christ that it's just
that makes
so
it hard. The
excruciating.
mixture, yeah.
And you're trying to how do you make sense of this thing? How do you? But sadly,
the cognitive dissonance will break your brain. Yeah. It really is. It's brutal.
Yeah. So, but I want to share one other thing that I've come back to again and again about the LGBTQI community, and it was interesting. I had to look this up. The Christian Post actually reported in October of 2023, Catherine Kaiser, that she was reporting that in 1989, Bob Jones had an encounter with the Lord in which he was shown 100,000 people from the LGBTQ community being saved, healed, and transformed, and he saw them becoming intercessors, evangelists, and great lovers of God. And went on to say that they would become the greatest evangelists of their generation.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's actually, she's a friend of mine. That's a columnist, contributor for our op-ed page. I curated that one. I know Miss Kaiser pretty well, and it is, I can tell you, especially I'm very much a believer in historic Christian sexual ethics. We as a publication hold those values. Marriage between a man and a woman, only kind of sexual activity that God blesses is inside of a marriage between a man and a woman, where we are totally biblically rooted on that and on all things at CP. Having said that, it's been fascinating because as I've been covering this trans and queer horror stuff, as I've been inundated from LGB types who are scared out of their minds, and some of them have become whistleblowers, and they will talk to anybody. And look, I want to keep the communication channels open, no matter how much I may, disagree theologically or philosophically. I've talked to a wide swath of people who, when you see children getting hurt, when you see teenagers having their body parts cut off, when you see young people be rendered sterile, some existential crises are they like what it rattles people.
Yeah, some of these lesbians are coming forward.
Yes.
And saying, this is not us. This is
right. And it's like I am firmly committed to the teaching of our faith with respect to these issues. I still want to urge every Christian who's listening to talk to people, because you would be surprised at the kind of folks that are in my inbox these days that are saying, what can I do to help? I'm scared out of my mind. This is the most evil thing I've ever seen. I can't support this. So talk to people. I mean, I totally believe that God is pricking the consciences of many people who are kind of in this same milieu, but are not on board with the castration of children.
Amen.
I mean, what decent person is, whether you tilt right or tilt left politically, I mean, nobody wants to see a child harmed if you're halfway decent. I mean, it's just only the people who are believing in this and with the kind of cult-like religious fervor that you sometimes see. The vast majority of the American public does not support this. And in fact, even Democratic polling data showed in the aftermath of the election last fall that the top reason why in swing states, why voters opted for President Trump as opposed to Kamala Harris, because of Kamala Harris' support for the trans stuff, by 28 points, a whopping 28 points in the swing states. That was the top, where the largest margin of difference was. Big deal.
You understand that if the wicked one has really used this as a wedge, because what they do is they plant the seed that Christians are really not loving and kind. Well, let me explain this, because I was responding to something major on Facebook this morning. I'll repost it maybe on some of my sites, but it's not that anybody who's a real Christian does not hate homosexuality, but we hate the sin, not the sinner. In other words, Jesus hates the adulterer, but doesn't. No, excuse me. Hates the sin of adultery, but not the adulterer. He hates the stealing, but not the bank robber. He doesn't hate the bank robber, but the fact that they're doing the sin. So,
Right.
And that's important. But I will not give up the fact that I don't like my sin, and I don't like your sin. I hate my sin, and I in turn will hate your sin. But I'm absolutely committed to loving. I mean, there's a lot of very tender-hearted people, and I don't know why they make these choices. I don't know what causes this, and that's to be debated. But nonetheless, sin is sin. It's biblical sin, and mayhem cannot prevail. I mean, all our laws are based on a moral decision. You just like we the people, when we decided that no, you can't have slavery. All men are created equal. They are endowed by the certain creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's why these men were protesting in Memphis, saying, "I'm a man." Can you imagine not being considered a man because you have more tan on your skin? I mean, if you think about it from the outside, it's really quite moronic. It's quite stupid. Judging people by the color of their skin. I mean, it just blows my mind. What goes on. And well, anyway, I know you have to break away. I'm going to ask Pastor John to stick around so we can fill up the hour for WCNO. But I do want to ask you this: what's the name of your newspaper? How do they subscribe to it? I'd like to subscribe to it. Also, what's the name of your podcast? Remember, so some people are not seeing this as we are going live today. They're going to be hearing it on radio. And so if you could repeat a couple of times, all about what your products.
Sure. And thanks again for having me, Rhett. ChristianPost.com. If you go there, you'll see it'll be right there. You can just subscribe. You'll get it to your inbox. The documentary podcast, which you will also see on our main page, is called Generation Indoctrination. And the landing page for the Christian Post for that podcast is generationindoctrination.com. And again, you can get that on Apple iTunes and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I would also point everyone to, if you're interested in seeing what transgender ideology does to families, which is kind of the untold story, how this rips apart relationships with parents with their children. There's a very moving documentary I was honored to be a part of. The filmmaker is not even a religious person, but it profiles 3 parents who had their lives upended by this. You can go to deadnamedocumentary.com.
Dead Name, DEAD.
Namedocumentary.com. And that's also now available on Amazon Prime and Roku, Apple TV, all those other platforms. But that'll give you sort of an intimate portrait glimpse into the lives of families that have been shattered and shredded by this demonic ideology. That's very much worth your time. It's about 50 minutes. It's very moving.
Also, we have a little local connection to you. I met you up here in Vermont, and you're also a classical pianist, exceptionally gifted. But you also happen to know a friend of mine yesterday. I've known her since she was a young lady. She now has 5 children, and she was in town running for school board a few years back. And then she started an organization called
Moms for Liberty,
women, Mothers for Liberty.
Moms for Liberty,
Moms for Liberty, and now has just been exalted to a higher position working with the Heritage Organization. How is it that you know Tiffany Justice yourself?
Yeah, I met her a couple years ago. She's been a co-belligerent in this fight against gender ideology.
A co-belligerent?
We've been fighters in the trenches against. I think she's been doing some really crucial work getting this stuff out of schools, which are really ground zero for this. I mean, she's the recent Supreme Court case I know she was involved in with the Maryland parents who were fighting against this filth in the schools here in Montgomery County, Maryland, where I'm just the county over, where the parents objected to being their children being subjected to drag and filthy content at ages 3 and 4, and they couldn't opt out of it. They won at the Supreme Court just last month. So she's been doing some great work, and I met her a couple years ago at Heritage before she was elevated to that position. But she's been a fighter in the trenches against the gender scourge, and so I've met a lot of really great, interesting people in these last couple of years as we've been fighting the good fight.
Yeah, Tiffany, I knew from the first time I knew her dad. Her dad used to actually own the buildings we broadcast out of, and he passed away. He was a car dealership owner and did very well with his AOL, became abundantly wealthy, but a very nice man, very intelligent. And then Tiffany came along as a young lady. I immediately knew, I said, wow, she is really exceedingly bright. And then when she went into the Moms for Liberty, I said, well, I hope she's ready for this ride, because I think she's just going to do nothing but really, I don't know, maybe she'll run for the presidency one day. I mean, she's really quite brilliant. I hope that, I hope she's ready for this ride, because it's going to be, but we need her.
She loves DC. So anybody who's, I think she'll do well. She will do well.
Now, I want to mention one other thing. The Hobby Lobby, we like to do our business with Hobby Lobby. They're not a sponsor, but I'd like them to be. But because they're that family who's totally Christian, they built a museum in Washington, D.C. dedicated to the Bible. Have you been there?
I have been. It's quite an impressive facility. I really like it over there. It's really great. So
maybe, I don't know, maybe Pastor John and I will end up getting a group together and going up there, but I hope that you would participate with us, and we might, you might meet the group face to face when we come up to Washington.
Be great.
Wonderful. Listen, God bless you and be with you, make his face to shine upon you. You need spiritual protection, so I hope people listening to this will pray fervently for you.
Thank you.
And
Appreciate
keep it up. I know you're an academic, so some of the things, I'm having to catch up slowly, but hopefully we'll do some more interviews in the future, and I can catch up with you on this. All right. Pastor John, anything you want to say to him? You and I are going to take over, but anything you want to say finally to this gentleman?
Brandon, great work again. And please tell your colleagues at the Christian Post we're really grateful for the hard work they're doing. Keep up the good work, and we'll continue to promote the Christian Post.
Well, it's nice to be on the air with a fellow Anglican. I got confirmed in the Anglican Church in 2010, and so I now call myself an Anglicostal or Charismanglican. So I'm sort of in this. Sounds like we're in a similar stream.
Absolutely.
You know what's amazing is that Pastor John and I have known each other 24 years, but I never got that close to him before, because I kind of thought he was an Anglican and probably, you know what I mean. And all of a sudden now they're having a healing service on Thursdays at 11 o'clock. And even my wife went in there with a back problem, and this enormous heat came over her back and healed her back. These things are happening. So when you say, what did you call Anglican Costal?
Anglicostal. It's just kind of a fun little word. So
Anglicostal, I like that very much. Well, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
There's a wave coming, baby.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, you have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye, Brandon.
And John, you and I will continue if that's okay with you.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. So how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for calling me in.
Yeah. What do you think of that Anglo-Costal? I think that's brilliant that he said that, because there seems to be a move, and obviously it's not limited to you and your local church in Vero Beach, Florida. By the way, what's the name of your church in Vero Beach?
St. Paul's.
And you're located on the beach. Explain where you're located.
999 Flamevine Lane. And somehow the Lord worked it out that it would rhyme. So we're very grateful for that. 999 Flamevine.
So what do you think about this? I'm sure you find this whole thing, the word, as Dalton so aptly stated, disturbing. Yeah.
No, it's deeply disturbing. And I mean, evil is disturbing, and by definition it's just awful, and so you're trying to make sense of it, and obviously there's so much publicity or media out there saying that, oh, this is conspiracy theory and everything else, that you want to, as best you can, to look at the facts. And the problem is there's a whole group of people out there who are so committed to not allowing the facts get out. So anyway, the bottom line is, yes, I believe this is happening. I'm very grateful for Brandon and others at the Christian Post who were doing the shoe leather work, as he says, to bring out the facts. We need the facts. The truth will set you free, the Lord says. And we need the truth, as difficult and as painful as it is. We need the truth to come out.
You know, and I do want to say this, that I thank God that I was born heterosexual. I thank God that I don't have a penchant for these things. So I do not want anybody to think that I am somehow superior. And if you are caught in the throes of a sin, I do not think I'm any better than you. I think it's important for people to know that, you know, because people are caught up in this stuff, and who knows about this demonic activity. I'm really amazed of these lesbians that are coming forward now, particularly I think older lesbians saying, look, you know, this is the lifestyle we've chosen. And maybe it's because they're just whatever the situation is, why they're attracted, or they want to live their lives with another woman. But they're coming forward and saying, hey, we don't want children being abused like this, whether it's physiologically being altered or psychologically being raped by these pedophiles, you know?
Absolutely. No, I mean, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Each and every one of us is prone or susceptible to sin of one kind or another, and so we have a heart for every sinner, and we extend grace because grace has first been extended to us. Forgiveness has been extended to us through Jesus and his death on the cross. His atoning blood is absolutely perfect to cleanse every sin. And ultimately, these sins, whatever the sin is, whether it's pedophilia or homosexuality, whatever it is, it's destructive to the human person. And the reason why we don't like it is because we don't like people to suffer. We don't want people to suffer. And ultimately, we understand that every sin causes the human being to suffer very painfully. And so we want to see them set free from that, every person to be set free.
Well, it's kind of like, I know you deal with people with addictions too, and alcohol becomes, for instance, that's the most people are addicted to alcohol, although I think that more suicides are committed by people addicted to gambling. You know, I guess it's a year and a half ago, the Jack in the Box her husband had started Jack in the Box, and she had inherited $1 billion with a B, $1 billion. And in a year, she had gambled the entire $1 billion away. People didn't know about her bank accounts. So, of course, banks are always willing to loan money to wealthy people. So now, at the end of all this, she not only lost the $1 billion, but she's $100 million in debt because of this addiction. And more people commit suicide over gambling addiction. And these things can overwhelm and take people over. And I guess, I mean, I want to think we're in a dark age, but I remember watching the HBO, I think it was the series on our second president, John Adams. And I remember he had some wonderful children. One of his sons ended up becoming president later on. But his one son was addicted to alcohol and died a horrible death. And I don't know why I always think of him, but there was no such thing as a 12-step program like Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever, or Celebrate Recovery that's available in many churches, because his son died a horrible death of alcoholism. And so thank God, at least we have these 12-step programs today. And I don't know where I was going with all this, but
all sin is destructive to the human being. And, so the Lord Jesus came to not only forgive sin, but to set us free. And
let me ask you this. I'm going to ask you a hard question now. So I am pro-Israel. I've even in the past considered myself a Zionist. I remember when I first flew into Jerusalem, I thought, I'm going to the land of the Jews, and all of a sudden I hear, and you and I have spoken this because you've been there a number of times. I go, what in the world is that? an ancient, they kept Israel, Jerusalem looking very like an ancient city. And they said, well, that's the Muslims. And I said, I thought this was supposed to be a Jewish community. And so everything that's going on there, like with the Netanyahu, for instance, I wrote something yesterday on Facebook, and I was wondering if God would be mad at me because I said, I'm pro-Israel. But I believe this is a very bad PR situation for the Jews because, okay, yes, the Jews were attacked. Yes, they had a right to attack back. But couldn't Mossad have gone in some way differently and taken out these who are the bad guys called here? It starts with an H, Hamas.
Hamas.
So I'm kind of like, and now Netanyahu is like just letting these children are starving. Now they're coming back. The Jews are saying, we've been sending in, the UN even has said, we've been sending in food, but Hamas is stealing it, the soldiers of Hamas. So I don't know. I don't want God getting mad at me, but, it's like, I feel like Israel needs to we can't have children dying of starvation.
Right. Yeah, and I think I totally agree. We don't want children dying of starvation, and yet the dynamics on the ground are so complex, Rhett. And I absolutely believe that Hamas is doing everything they can to stop the aid from going to the people because the PR campaign that they're playing is they want, sadly, we can't even imagine, but they want those children to starve so that they can make Israel look bad. And I believe that Israel is doing everything in their power to get the aid to the people. And Hamas is stopping it on the ground.
Well, half measures availeth little. I told people this. I said, well, if you had a person in your life who has cancer, or you have cancer, or whoever it might be, you don't want the doctor to come back, the surgeon to come back and say, well, we cut out half of it. You cut out half of it. Yeah, well, we didn't want to be too radical. So, well, the other half is going to kill the person. So when you go in and have to surgically remove the cancer, but I can't help but wonder if there could have been, Netanyahu is at once a courageous man for doing what he's done and having the backbone to go in and do what he's done. But you're right, Hamas has made Israel look bad to even some of our students who have become anti-Semitic, and I'm shocked. I can't believe what's going on.
Well, the media, though, is totally reporting on the side of Hamas. And Israel and the work that the IDF is doing on the ground to try to help the Palestinian people that's never going to be reported. And so anyway, I understand what you're saying, but I think that we're getting a very one-sided view in the news.
All right, let's jump into something else here, and I want to talk about, because we have a little short time left. I'm talking with Pastor John Robbins. He is the pastor over at St. John's. It is in Anglican Church, right?
St. Paul's, yeah.
Oh, St. Paul's. 999
Flame High Lane.
I will tell you this,
Paul,
though,
it's Paul.
as a marketing guy.
Yeah.
I remember one time somebody was advertising with me on Ocean Drive. Oh, the Tides restaurant, and in the advertisement, I gave the wrong street, and they got so many phone calls that they knew the advertising was working, and so they increased their advertising.
Wow!
But anyway, so if I say St. Paul's when in fact it's St. John's, or I say it's St. John when in fact it's St. Paul's. But anyway, here's what I want to know. Okay, so for years, you and I want people to know we've known each other. 24 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And you were on and you would bring guests on and then you disappear and we never sort of connected. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, you've grown spiritually. Hopefully I've grown, but I run into you and find out you have a healing service,
right?
Which I find amazing because, most people are cessationists, right? They believe that somehow healing stopped at a certain point. And that's because men don't like what they can't control. And they'd rather believe that than have to deal with the not knowing the formula. And God doesn't work by formulas. But what's amazing is I don't know when you started this. I know thank you. You have an advertisement in Vero's Voice magazine. We appreciate your support, and we really are very happy to be supporting you. But you've been having some miracles over there at 11 o'clock on Thursdays. How did this all come to pass?
Yeah, and actually, so our ad in Vero's Voice says, "Need a miracle?" Question mark. Come to St. Paul's, and a little bit it's tongue in cheek to some extent, because of course we don't guarantee a miracle necessarily, or the miracle that you're looking for every time you walk through the door.
No.
But we have seen the Lord move in miraculous ways in a number of people's lives. And, one, of course, you mentioned your own wife, Barbara, who came in with some really bad back pain, and our team prayed for her. I wasn't even a part of that prayer. But thankfully, we've raised up a team of very faithful prayer warriors, and they laid hands on Barbara. And the word that I got back was she was 90% healed. And
well, it grew after that. I mean, it
words,
got better. It got 100% after that.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, and some people would say, well, if she was only 90% healed, that couldn't have been Jesus, because every time Jesus healed somebody, it was always 100%.
No, and that's not true. If you remember, he prayed for the man with bad eyesight, blinded, and he spit on some mud, put it on his eyes, and then Jesus said, "How do you see?" He said, the man said, "I see men as trees walking about." And even Jesus had to pray for him a second time. And you remember, Jesus said he could not do miracles in Capernaum because of their lack of faith.
Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah, so I mean, we lay hands on the sick and the infirmed, and those who are troubled by demonic spirits, and we've seen the Lord move powerfully. And anyway, we're very, very grateful. So one was Barbara, who got great relief, and even now apparently pain free in her back. And we've had other people come in with serious lung issues, where they literally, every time they would breathe in deeply, they would cough violently. And so we laid hands on this particular individual. We said, okay, I want you to breathe in deeply now. And I don't want you to worry if you cough or whatever. The person, after praying, breathed in deeply, and their eyes got as wide as circles, because they had never breathed in deeply like that in recent years without coughing violently, and there was no cough. And so we've seen that kind of thing happen again and again. And in that particular case, I can tell you that the individual experienced some, basically the return of the coughing came. And we said, please come back in, we'll pray again. And so we've seen this kind of thing where people will experience a level of healing, and then the sickness of the infirmity will come back, or may come back. We pray again. And I can tell you, this person is having symptom-free, essentially, breathing now, after a number of times praying for her. And it was a diagnosed infirmity, which was, she was basically told, hey, you're going to have this the rest of your life. And now the person is breathing freely.
Amazing. Okay, now we're out of time for today. So, Pastor John, it's St. Paul's, correct?
St. Paul's. And it's 999 Flamevine Lane, and our healing services at 11 a.m. on Thursdays.
God bless you. Thanks for coming over to the studio, Pastor John.
Bless you. Thank you so much, Rhett.
All right. We got to take a break back, and we'll be right back.
All right. You're clear.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rhett.
Okay. Hey, John, I'll talk to you a little later, okay?
Okay, brilliant.
Okay.
Thanks for coming in today.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. God bless you. Have a great day.
As well. All right, gentlemen, looking good. Thanks for coming in today. Give me just a couple minutes. I'm going to get everything set up on this end. Rhett just finished, and we'll go ahead and get you set up.
Sounds good.
Thank you. What's going on, brother?
My brother. Gonna do this or what, man? We're gonna do this.
Yeah,
Whatever
man.
I-
How long are we going for? The full hour?
Yeah, whatever you want.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, man. Wow. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about church. We're going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about all of it.
Oh yeah. You know, the synergy of church and state. And gotta get you out there and getting people know what's going on. District 77, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good.
How's the better half
Just
doing?
adding his name here.
Good.
And,
We're we're getting ready to take off to Gulf Shores, your hometown Alabama over there.
Oh, roll Tide.
Yeah, where the kids are coming down from Tennessee. We're going to meet them and camp for the week up there at the state park. It's going to be great.
Nice. Safe travels.
Yeah, man. They just spent 33 days on the road. Got back, had 2 flat tires, and I had to change the water pump on the truck.
Where'd you guys go? Carolina.
We went to Tennessee, picked up the kids there, and they had 2 RVs, and we all drove up to Michigan.
Oh.
Yep. And then they went home. We went to Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Virginia, South Carolina, and back here.
Wow. It's a nice trip, man.
5,000 miles, yeah.
Wow.
It's good.
There's no way I could do that with my back and hips and the spine. But that's awesome.
Yeah, it's you got to keep the driving down to 400 or 500 miles a day. It's not too bad, but after that, it's a lot. Pulling the RV, of course, it's got a 40-foot fifth wheel, so it's a pretty big deal. And then we got this week, and then one more week camping, and then we're back to school in September. So we're trying to squeeze it all in.
My daughter starts college here in a couple of weeks.
Man, where's she going?
She really should be a junior in high school, but she did dual enrollment. So she's done with high school as a sophomore.
Nice. Yeah.
So next 2 years, she's going to be taking college classes. So she'll graduate high school with her diploma and her associate's degree at the same time. And she wants to go to UF. She'll go up to junior.
That'll be good.
Yeah, I'm trying to get her to stay local. Florida Gulf Coast University here in Fort Myers, but
they got a good rep over there, don't they?
Yeah, they do, but they don't really have the programs and stuff that she's wanting to do.
Yeah. My daughter's starting to.
Whenever you gentlemen are ready, I'm going to go ahead and play the theme song to get you going.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Dylan.
My pleasure.
Nope.
And now it is time for the Patriot Church, hosted by Pastor John Vecchiano.
Amen. Good morning, all you lovers of God, country, and family. We are here this morning. As you know, many of you have been following me around as I've been traveling these last 33 days. I got to visit the Battle of Monmouth a couple of weeks ago. So if you haven't seen that broadcast, make sure you go back a few weeks in the library here and check it out. What a time to just kind of walk those hallowed grounds there in New Jersey and just realize that, man, you're walking on the same dirt old George Washington and the guys did back in the day, and just some great history there. So I shared a lot of great stuff a couple of weeks ago, and we're just keep on keeping on as we're getting ready. We're hot and heavy, getting ready to go into another election season for 2026, and got one of my best buds here, Michael Thompson. He has put his hat in the ring for Florida House District 77. So glad you can come on this morning, brother, and tell us all that's going on. And man, we've known each other, over 3 years now. And man, we just we hit it off when we first met. I guess we were kind of both coming in as chairman of our counties, few years ago, and learned a lot of different things, saw a lot of crazy things, of course, and now the Lord has kind of led you into this this great move coming into this House district seat. I'll tell you what I preached Sunday. I don't know if you got to see the message. I know sometimes you check in on me on my Patriot Church messages and all that, but Sunday's message was called Fearless Pulpit, and kind of was springboarding off of the announcement that was made at the beginning of July, where the IRS came out and said it's now okay for a 501c3 nonprofits to endorse candidates from the pulpit. But of course, it's always been okay to do that. But there's been over 70 some years of fear put into the churches and the pastors. And so Sunday we went all back through all that kind of stuff and realized that we've got to remain fearless, not fearful. And you certainly have embodied that since I've known you, brother, to be fearless in your walk, things that you say, your leadership, great things you've done as a chairman. So this is a lot of great things. So thanks for coming on this morning, and just want to get you out there so people know who you are and get you winning this race come 2026.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's good to see you. It's been a while. I chose not to run again for the chair back in December. I kind of served my purpose here locally, which was, basically to, put the local county party, back on a path of righteousness, I guess, if you could say, back on America, traditional values, what we really support, America first. And we did that. We accomplished that. And, when I was elected chair, I told everybody, I only plan on being here for one term, maybe two, depending on, how things were going. But, in reality, I mean, I honestly accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish, within the first year, at the party level, and then, the second year, we basically just focused on getting Republicans elected, specifically President Trump and, our congressional representatives, Congressman Byron Donalds, who's now running for governor of Florida.
Yeah.
And, our other congressman is Congressman Greg Stubbe, so that was awesome. Very, very blessed to have such good congressmen over here in Southwest Florida. We did our thing up at the state level, which was really awesome. It was good to see you up there, taking the lead, when it came to, providing the faith and all that, with the state party. So yeah, I decided to, jump out of the party, if you will. Mission accomplished. We kind of rebuilt it, rebranded it, and got President Trump elected. That's kind of like, really what I was there for. So now I think it's time, we start, trying to reform, the Florida legislature. I don't know how well you or your, followers paid attention to, what happened this past session, but I mean, it was tough at best. There was a lot of back and forth. The legislature was, arguing with the governor nonstop, feuding with him at times. And in my opinion, I think it's because the majority of our legislatures are dictated to and controlled by campaign managers and lobbyists, and now that Governor DeSantis is a lame duck governor, they've got a 2-year window per se, because, he can't be reelected, to, put forth their campaign managers and lobbyists, legislation, because they, DeSantis has really, pulled the Florida legislature across the finish line for the first 6 years, in the last 2 years, since he's not going to be running again, it's kind of like open season for those guys. So, they're going to try and stick it to him as much as humanly possible, because, when Congressman Donalds gets elected as governor, we're going to be, focused back on America first policy again, and, not necessarily lobbyists first.
Yeah, it's been pretty clear. A lot of the grassroots folks have really been continuing to fight the good fight, exposing a lot of things. I know there was a great rally, didn't get to go to it this last weekend over there in Venice, with Raj Dursami. They were talking about some things there about taking back our state, things like that. I know of course, the state party was not too happy with all that was going on with those groups. But hey, this is about us having real conversation, whether we're in a party together or a group together or not. Let's get back to the basic principles of common sense, of course, America first, and really begin to secure our rights and our freedoms for our kids and our grandkids, so that when we're gone, man, we can feel like we have had mission accomplished, and that we can pass that torch of liberty to our kids and grandkids.
Yeah. Yeah, the grassroots here in Florida is very active. They have been for a long time. I've known Raj for a long time, man, 5-6 years it seems. Like when I first got into politics back in 2019, met him through Defend Florida, election integrity group, that formed after the 2020 stolen election. So that's really what it's about. You can't take everything for granted. Florida is a Republican state, conservative state. That's one word. So I did an interview on Fox News Radio the other day, last Friday, and he was like, Michael, why are you running? We have an elected official, a Republican, in that seat already. You're primarying an incumbent, and she's. Do you think that she's done a bad job? And I was like, no. I was like, I don't think she's done a bad job. I was like, but I know I could do a better job, right? And he's like, but she's, pretty conservative. And I'm like, conservative? What does that even mean nowadays?
Right.
Like, the word conservative is thrown around like the word racist. Everybody wants to be conservative. Oh, I'm conservative. Well, they're conservative. Well, they're conservative. It's like popular. I was like, I kind of identify as a patriot, more than a conservative. I think people have stolen that,
Yeah.
Ask anybody in Tallahassee, they'll tell you they're a conservative, but look at their voting record and the legislation that they propose, and they'll kind of tell you the opposite.
Exactly.
So I think, keeping the grassroots going is critically important, especially here in Florida. We have 1.3 million, voter lead, Republicans over Democrats, but, look at what happened in California. You remember back in the 1980s when, Reagan was out there, or president, and, before then, California was pretty red, and look what happened. They took their eye off the ball, and they started, political correctness started coming in and so on and so forth. And I mean, you can't get hardly a Republican elected out there anymore because the elections are just so completely rigged. First and foremost, there's a lot of awesome patriots that live out there. God bless them, and God bless them for continuing the fight that they're doing out there,
Right.
But at the end of the day, all that could happen here in Florida. It really could, so, God bless all the grassroots organizations. They need to keep the fire going. I think, what they're advocating for is exactly what we need, but politics is a game, at the end of the day. I had a gentleman ask me the other day, because he saw me, taking some photos with, people at the state level that we know, that I probably wouldn't, like associate with or hang out with or, whatnot. But, and he was like really upset with me. He called me a rhino, called me this, called me that. I was like, what do you want me to do? Run into a movie theater screaming fire? I was like, I tend, I look at, never confuse activity with productivity, right? Now you can run in there and scream and holler and call them corrupt to their face. And how do you think that they're really wanting to, interact and deal with you? I mean, I'm a business guy, so I kind of approach it from a business standpoint. Let's sit down and have a conversation and debate it, right? Let's debate the facts. So I was like, I would much rather walk into the movie theater, sit down next to my opponent and say, look, bro, we need to work together. And, if we're unable to, just, understand that I'm going to strike a match underneath your seat, and burn it to the ground. You can't just go in there and just start screaming and hollering. Nobody's going to respect that, So although I believe everything that the grassroots does, I just have a different approach to actually getting it accomplished, at the state level. Again, it's just an opinion that I have, but you can't confuse activity with productivity.
That's a great point. Activity versus productivity. Great. Your area there, Southwest Florida, what counties is around there?
Yeah, so we're in Lee County, over here in the Fort Myers area, Fort Myers, Cape Coral. Naples is just south of us in Collier County. Charlotte County is just to the north of us, Port Charlotte area. And as you head inland a little bit further, you got Hendry County, which is LaBelle, Clewiston, as you start getting out towards the south central part of the state, and Lake Okeechobee. Yeah, we're 2 counties south of Sarasota.
That's cool. So it's a nice area. Again, I think people get a little bit, what's the good word? They think, like you said, we got 1.3 million votes up from the Dems. We're a really red state. Everybody else, free Florida, we're all that kind of stuff. But yet, like you said, just recently, the legislature has just been a thorn in the side of the governor. So again, this is part of why we have this process, especially with House races every 2 years, so that we can really keep those accountable who say they're conservatives, say they're patriots, say they're whatever, America first, but yet look at their voting record again and see what they have just not allowed to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the name of the game, really. So what is the biggest thing that a politician wants? Really, there's 3 things. A, to get elected, B, to get reelected, and C, what office am I running for next?
Right.
I mean, right? These people
Yeah.
are career politicians. I'm sorry,
Right.
this isn't my career. I'm 50 years old. I just turned 50 years old, right? I've never made $1 off of politics, except when I, worked for this one nonprofit. I was the state director. That came with a paycheck. That was great. That was really the only. So I worked with them for like 10 months, over the past 6 years. Other than that, I've never made $1 off of politics, but this is their livelihood. I'm a real estate broker, right? So it's kind of like, maybe a politician, coming into real estate and basically saying, hey, Michael, I'm going to be the best real estate in the area, and, I'm going to take all your business. I'm not going to appreciate that. I kind of like what I've got going on, but at the end of the day, it's a free market. You can kind of do what you want to, but, these people fight back, and they fight back hard. When I announced that I was running last Tuesday afternoon, I made my announcement. Wednesday morning at 8:30, I got a phone call from a bunch of people in politics. Michael, you don't want to do this. Michael, we're going to ask you to drop out of the race. Michael, we're going to ask you to reconsider. You really have no idea what's headed your way. And I'm like, yeah. I was like, when I was chairman of the GOP, I took a lot of bullets and fisticuffs. I was like, I kind of have an idea on what's coming my way. I was like, but at the end of the day, there isn't anything that you guys haven't said or done to me that you haven't already.
Right.
Well, we got a $40 million PAC, sitting up in Tallahassee in the Florida House, just to protect our own. And I'm like, okay, well, good. You're going to need it, because I've got the support of the community. The district lines that I'm in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, were gerrymandered in 2021, to include a portion of the district that's historically never been in the district, just, for the current, incumbent, to have. Now, she moved into the district, but she didn't have to move that far into the district. She would have had to move, 20 plus miles, to be in the traditional district. But, politics is tough. It really is, and at the end of the day, I think, we're at a time in our history, coupled with everything that's going on, I think, people who really love their country and love traditional values, need to stand up. I mean, take a look at all the wokeism, that's going along. I mean, the trans queers, what? What? So there's one guy here in town. He actually attends a business meeting that I'll be going to in the morning, and he was the president of the Bonita Springs Democrat Club or something like that. You know, he shows up as in a dress.
Mhm.
You know, he's got long hair. And I just look at him and I'm like, bro, you know, what are you doing? Are you a
Yeah.
man? You're a woman? You know, I mean, if you're gonna, you know, if you're a man and you want to go the woman route, then go all out, bro. You know, shave all the hair on your arms, you know, shave your legs, you know, shave your underarms, you know, be a total retard. You know, just don't like, you know, pick and choose. Well, today I want to be a man, tomorrow I want to be that. You're mentally challenged, you know, and I think it's important, you know, that people, you know, who can understand this, you know, and have belief, you know, in traditional marriage, you know, specifically, you know, Adam and Eve, you know, God didn't make Adam and Steve, right? You know, I think it's time for us to stand up, you know, like you have over the past several years, you know, and really push that narrative out there, you know, that look, this is not acceptable. You know, and I'm not doing this for me, you know, like I said, I don't make any money doing this. I'm sure you don't either. But, you know, what we're really trying to do is to, you know, foster a community, you know, within the young people in our community. They need to see leadership. You know, they
Right.
haven't seen that in a long time, specifically in politics.
Yeah. We learned a great quote in our Constitution class that said, politicians are only concerned about the next election. Patriots are concerned about the next generation. And that's what we've been talking about all the time. And it's,
Yeah.
we've seen it. We've seen the ugliness of course, of politics, of that, you know, it's my guy, my team. You know, we got our pack. Nobody's going to take it from us. And that, of course, is a big issue in our state as well as these packs that literally are laundering money back and forth to and fro. And it's just there's got to be some kind of legislation to fix that. But of course, when you're all basically so many are stuck in that or have been deceived in that, they're not, you know, they're not going to be making any changes anytime soon. It's just like back when we put I always wondered, right, when Roosevelt ran and went over the what is currently the 2-term limit for 4 years, and Congress stepped up and Senate and said, "Hey, we're going to limit the presidency to 4 years." Well, why didn't they have term limits for themselves? You know, I always wonder why that didn't take place. But that's one of the reasons, because they know that when they get in these positions, they come in and they become millionaires, not because of the salary that they retrieve or get, but because of their associations with these packs and stuff.
Yeah, well, just look at Hakeem Jeffries, or I think, no, I'm sorry, it was crying Palestinian Chuck Schumer yesterday. You know, he came out and gave a little speech that basically said, "Oh, you know, look at Trump and what he's doing. He's profiting off of all this legislation and so on. I've never in my life, you know, seen a politician, you know, basically do this for their own selfish gain." And I'm like, what? I was like, that's the definition of a politician, bro. I mean, look at everyone in your party and half the Republican Party. You guys are insider traders. I mean, look at Nancy Pelosi. How do you make, you know, $176,000 a year and have, you know, $50 million in the bank?
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's those good stock tips that you got, you know. But anyhow, so what are some things you want to focus on for your county? You've been, you know, you're a grassroots guy. You pound the streets. You talk to your folks. You know what's going on in your community. What are folks saying they want to see really happen? Because I know anybody with any kind of common sense attitude knows that we just can't sit back and go head to the beach and pull out the chair and sit there and think everything's going to be okay, because the ones that are patriots, the ones that know that the battle is still raging, the ones that know that we got to continue to fight this good fight, those are the ones that are going to be the ones looking at you for a continued leadership.
Yeah, well, you know, we got to protect Florida, you know, first and foremost. I'm a big 10th Amendment guy. You know, those rights that haven't been given in the Constitution to the federal government belong to the state, you know, and I mean, hopefully, you know, we can keep control of the White House. That would be awesome, you know, but there's no guarantee on all of it. You know, they stole one election. You know, do you think the Democrats are going to, you know, steal another one? Chances are they probably are, or at least going to, you know, attempt every election cycle. You know, so I think we really need to, you know, make sure that Florida is, you know, positioned well. from a state standpoint against the federal government. Locally, we have a city in my district. It's not really a city. It's an unincorporated part of Lee County, but it's called Lehigh Acres, Florida. And Lehigh Acres is the second largest city in Southwest Florida population-wise, behind Cape Coral, and it's not even a municipality. So, it's kind of like a bedroom community. It's the redheaded stepchild community. We basically get leftovers from the county. So the county basically maintains all the infrastructure out here in our area. 90+% of it is on well and septic. We don't really have even governmental utilities in most of the district out here. We're a little bit rural. We're not like in, the Fort Myers city area. We're east of I-75, so as you head, inland a little bit, that's kind of like where we are. But, Lehigh Acres has over 150,000 people that live there.
Wow.
150,000 people, and they have no local government.
Yeah.
They have to be dictated to by, the county commissioners, and they've got enough to deal with, but the tax base really isn't there right now,
Right.
For them to actually sustain themselves financially, from a governmental standpoint, so there's also, an appetite in Tallahassee where they don't want to, have more municipalities. We have all 67 counties. We have, X amount of cities. We don't need to go through all this. Everything is fine. But, the people need local representation. They need a city government. They need people. Politics is local in nature, right? So if you don't have someone representing you, then you're kind of being dictated to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be a lot more beneficial, if people were actually able to represent themselves, in a local manner. Lehigh Acres is, I believe it's over 60% Hispanic. We don't have, any Hispanic, members willing to step up, at this point, or maybe they're willing to, we just don't really know who they are, because there's not really an opportunity for them to. So what I want to do is there's a lot of people, from the Miami area, Hialeah, coming over here, to Lehigh Acres because it's a lot more affordable. So one of my challenges is to start engaging with them, and start saying, hey, look at Miami, it's heavily Hispanic, kind of like my district is out here in the Lehigh Acres area.
Mm-hmm.
Who amongst you, is going to get up and start, leading, because that's what we need. I'm 50 years old. I don't want to be here forever doing this, right? So it's my determination to try and find people within the community, that are willing to step up and take control of it. We're going to focus on water issues. I think, have the district having someone to represent them, locally is important, because there's, one campaign manager here in town named Terry Miller. He's really good at what he does. He's probably one of the best campaign managers in the state of Florida. And, he runs 90% of all the elected officials here. So he has a lot of, clients and lobbyists. He's a lobbyist himself. So when you're at that level, you kind of, dictate, right? And we, the people, don't like being dictated to. We kind of like having our voices heard. So the current rep, like I shared earlier, kind of, got into the district, because it was planned that way. But, she lives in South Fort Myers. She doesn't really live out here in the majority part of the district, right? The previous state representative lived on the border of North Fort Myers and Cape Coral. But, that was before redistricting happened recently. So at that time, he was up in the very northwest part of the district. And the state representative before him also lived up in North Fort Myers. There's never been someone locally that, since I've been here, and I've been over here for, 20, coming up on 25 years, that has actually lived, in Lehigh Acres, which is the biggest city, the biggest town, I guess you could say, in our district, so we don't feel like we really have a voice, up in Tallahassee. We don't really have that someone who has, roots, planted here in the eastern part of the county and is unwilling to go up there and, advocate, for the eastern part of the county, so that's what I plan on doing. Hopefully we can bring some resources back over here, businesses, to create some more jobs, out in this area. Get a lot of blue collar workers out here and a lot of people, who are looking for opportunities.
Yeah. So what's would you know the voter demographics there, numbers wise? There's 150,000 in Lehigh Acres, that's the population, but how's your voter turnout been? Have you checked that out for your last few elections and all that?
Yeah, so voter turnout is historically not great, specifically in the midterms. You generally get the super voters to, pour out, but it really comes down to, getting the word out, and talking about issues that people actually care about. You can motivate people. A lot of the people, in the area out here, like specifically in Lehigh Acres, again, it's heavily Hispanic. We have to engage that community. There's so much similarities between, traditional American values and what we advocate for as America first, and biblical values, they're the same way.
Yeah.
We just need someone to actually reach out to them, so that's what I plan on doing. And hopefully we can get a lot bigger, higher voter turnout. This isn't, the one thing that we do have going for us, is our local congressman is running for, governor. So hopefully that'll spur a lot more turnout here locally.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, the district is probably 70-30, Republican. So our area has no elected Democrats, at the county or state level, so we're blessed, but, August primaries are always tough. It's kind of like, okay, who within the Republican Party, is going to be the starting quarterback, right? It's kind of like how that works out during a primary because we always win the general elections.
Yeah. And we need to remind all our voters too. We've talked about this with Steve Meyer's been on my show a few times. He's a great numbers guy. And again, reminding people that so many of our elections are won in the primaries where nobody really shows up to the primaries. They're just waiting for the next general election or whatever's coming down the road. So whether it's school board stuff or whatever. So we've got to make sure people get out and vote in the primaries because that's where you're really going to win.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of like what we're really focusing on right now. The super voters are going to come out and vote in the primary. Everyone else is going to come out in the general election just because it's a lot more, sensationalized, I guess you could say. Even here in Florida, it's a closed primary. So if you're not a registered Republican or if you're not a registered Democrat, you don't get to vote in the primaries. So that's why it's important, that, once we get to Tallahassee, that we can start having discussions, and trying to get the Florida, DMV, out. In my opinion, I think we need to get them out of voter registration.
Mm-hmm.
It's not their job. Their job is to, pass out, driver's licenses and IDs and things like that. It's not to register voters, and I think a lot of people that have, moved into our state over the past several years, it's been a huge increase to the Republican Party. But let me ask you, how much more of a lead could we have, from 1.3 million right now, if, we were actually able to sit down and explain to people when they moved here, if you're not registered as a Democrat or a Republican, you don't get to vote in the primary. A lot of people just go, it doesn't matter to me. Put me down as an independent. I don't think they really understand that if you're an independent, you don't get a vote in the primary, and the general election in most areas throughout Florida is already determined, because we have such a huge Republican majority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah, we got to get the word out. We've got to be able to continue to educate folks. And then just a short time I've been involved in an official capacity those couple of years. I learned a lot and what really needs to take place because so many folks we just don't know. They aren't educated enough. And it's just like, hey, we wait till the presidential election, or hey, we don't think this local election is important. But as you know, as I've found out, of course, really what goes on at the local level is as important, if not more important, than what's going on the federal level.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So I got started in 2019 into politics. I took my little, venture into politics, if you will. I didn't even know that there was a local county party. And I've lived here in Lee County since 2001. Yeah. So 18 years, 19 years I lived here, and I didn't even know there was a local party. That shows you how well the messaging goes, for Republicans. At that time, it was, Trump had been here for, 3 or 4 years as president. And I just couldn't believe, the nonsense that was happening at the national level, leading up to the 2020 reelection, for President Trump. And, specifically, what they were doing with General Flynn, they framed him. Then they got caught, and then the federal government said, okay, we're going to drop all the charges. And the judge, Emmett Sullivan, was like, no, it doesn't matter. The federal government can drop their charges all they want to. I'm going to prosecute Flynn as the judge. At that point, when I saw that, I was like, this is a banana republic. I was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. I need to get up and do something, right? I was sitting on my back porch, watching fake news or Fox News, which is fake news to me. And I was looking, through the sliding glass doors into my living room, and I saw my, 10-year-old daughter. And I was like, my gosh. I was like, I mean, it's so blatant right now. I can only imagine, when she's my age, what this world's going to be like. I got to get up and start doing something, right? So I went down to the local county party and, said, I'm here to, help President Trump get reelected. And, that's kind of like, really how it started, But if everyone just took care of their own backyard, if when you sign up to be a Republican or even a Democrat, but we're not gonna focus on that. When you go down and join your local GOP, you become what they call a precinct committee person. Each person, when you look at your voter ID card and it says you're in precinct whatever, right? I think I'm in precinct 512. So precinct 512, can have up to 6 or 7 men and 6 or 7 women joined the Republican Party, the party apparatus itself. So it really comes back down to, hey, look, you've got a handful of people, maybe a dozen people within your precinct, that should be out advocating to all your neighbors. When you guys are out here see, President Trump holding a rally, or, the State of the Union address, or whatever it is, invite people over to your house, get out the grill, cook up some hamburgers and hot dogs, make it a discussion on what's really going on in our country and even here locally, because General Flynn always says, local action, equals national impact. And it really did, so when I got involved locally and started learning, what garbage, actually happens here in my own backyard, that's really where I focused on, because I knew that I could make a bigger impact here locally, than I could ever do at the national level. So I would highly encourage everyone, if you really care about your community, I can promise you there's corruption out the yin yang. You just have to really go out here and start learning about it. And then once you learn about it, hold our elected officials accountable.
Yeah, it's such an important reminder for folks to stay engaged or get engaged. And it's part of our DNA, as a country. Over 200 years before, or over 200 years now, but before we even became a country, this messaging, this God, country, family, fighting against the political, social, and spiritual evils of our day. Those were the messages coming out of our pulpits throughout the colonies prior to us even becoming a country, and that's what empowered we, the people of the colonies, to really say, hey, we're going to fight this good fight. We've tried to do the olive branch thing with tyranny and all that. We've got to sign our Declaration of Independence, and in doing so, I always say that they signed gave their total dependence upon Almighty God, and that's what really would empower them to do that and do great, mighty things. We just got to keep getting that history out there. You get that information out there, get that education out there. And like you said, just if you break it down, like you're saying, into your local neighborhoods, things will happen. Things will certainly happen, and things will change for the better.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So let's talk about that if you've got a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, when I was the chairman, I had asked some members so we did a protest over at Planned Parenthood here in Fort Myers. I used to be known as protest guy, right? I was always on the street, sidewalk, holding signs, waving flags, and I tried to, inspire others to get out and be vocal and be active. And so I teamed up with, a few folks, and we went and protested Planned Parenthood. So I asked some of the members, I was like, why don't you do me a favor? Why don't you guys help us promote this, by going out and speaking to some of the churches, and speaking to some of the pastors and invite them and their congregation, to come join us. I was like, because, at the end of the day, this isn't just about politics. This is, biblical. And, thou shalt not kill. And they were like, oh man, they were all fired up. I already knew the answer, and I'm sure you do too, before we even go too much further, but they came back so disappointed, and they were like, Chairman, man, we couldn't get nobody to, come join us. And I was like, really? I was, playing dumb. I was like, what are you talking about? You couldn't get nobody. Well, they kept saying, that they didn't want to get into politics, and, that they were afraid that they would lose their 501c3 status. And, it's just not something that they're, willing to do. And I was like, man, that's disappointing. I was like, so what did you tell them? And they were like, well, we just, said, okay. I'm like, well, you shouldn't have said that. I was like, you might want to, consider next time you come into that situation is to challenge them a little bit, say, well, this really isn't about politics. This is kind of like biblical principles, instead of you standing behind the pulpit, waiting for people to come to you, why don't you get out in the street and preach like Jesus did, right? There's not a church in this country that has ever lost their 501c3 status because they have gone out here and, talk, biblical principles or, even political stuff. I go, that's just fake news. They do that to try and intimidate these pastors, because, church participation is down, and, a lot of people aren't giving as much as they should, that Jesus, demands. I was like, so everyone's always got an excuse, but that doesn't give you the right to just take it, challenge them. Could you imagine having, a pastor, or a church, standing on a sidewalk, with signs up, abortion is murder and all this stuff, and, having, and we did it at 5:00 because I wanted to get the most attention. We did it on Lane Road. Luckily, their, building was located on one of the busiest roads here in Fort Myers. So I chose that, specifically, and we did the 5:00 rush hour because I wanted to, have maximum exposure. So I was just sitting there thinking and talking with those guys. I was like, could you imagine if there was a church out there standing on the sidewalk, holding up signs like abortion is murder, save the children, things like this, that all those cars that were coming in and turning off the main road or sitting at the red light while we're sitting there in the middle of the intersections and stuff like that. Could you imagine someone sitting there saying, man, you know what? I really need to get back to church. That's the kind of church that I want to belong to right there.
Yeah, and that's what we want to proclaim with Patriot Church, and we want every church to be a quote unquote Patriot Church. That to understand that the total, to be able to proclaim and preach the total counsel of God, the fullness of the good news, is being able to, as a shepherd, to be reminded that we are here to protect our flock. So do I not protect them in the political arena? Do I not protect them in a uncomfortable area? Well, of course I should. So that's why, as the old Patriot pastors proclaimed, that we will fight against the political, social, and spiritual evils of our day. And if we don't do that, then we're going to be that fearful pulpit, not that fearless pulpit. So what's the excuse going to be next, brother, when now that these churches have been told officially, right, quote unquote officially, that you can stand in your pulpit and endorse a candidate? Well, what's going to be the excuse now? That's the funny thing now that I'm saying. What's going to stop them now? Because they used to try to fall back on the separation of church and state garbage and everything else we've seen from a few different court cases from, going all the way back into the 1800s. 77 years after Thomas Jefferson penned that letter to the Danbury Baptist, the Supreme Court continued to say, and Congress, quote, to preserve our Christian values and practices and public policy. So we still were considered then a Christian nation by the Supreme Court and by our Congress. It's just amazing to look back at our history and our heritage to see that, and whereas so many people have been deceived through, whether it's been the 1619 Project or the woke goings on throughout everything. The churches are have been so susceptible to that, and seeing all the garbage that's taken place over the years and how it's infiltrated our school systems, our colleges, our universities. It's just been, but we were warned, brother. There was warnings about this for years and years. That that. And the Marxists came out and said, "Hey, we're going to get your kids, and we're going to tell you how we're going to do it. We're going to get them through the schools." And we sat back and like, where was the church? So, as a pastor, as a Christian, I feel like I can call out myself, the church, and say, "Hey, we've dropped the ball, church. It's time for a third great awakening, and we've got to continue to fight this good fight. We can't give up on this stuff." So.
Yeah.
And I appreciate again what you're talking about and what you're saying, what you're going to do, because I know that you are a believer, a man of God, and that you want to make your community a better place, a safer place, a more profitable place, and you bring that great perspective of being a businessman, to that seat. So that's going to be great.
Yeah. I tell you what, I'm just sitting here smiling, listening to you, man. I'm like, man, give that guy a microphone. No, you're right. I think, one of the things that you're going to probably hear pushback from the church, probably, in church leadership is, oh, well, look, just because we have the right, to get out here and endorse candidates doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be getting political. We still have Democrats, that come to church, and I would push back on that. Now, how can you be a Christian in today's society and stand for the garbage that the Democrat Party stands for? Right? Let's have that discussion, because if that's really what you believe, then we need to bring you up here right now and pray over you and make you have a better understanding of what the Bible really means, because I don't think you get it, but I'm actually going to our church. We have a barbecue today at 6:30.
Oh, I saw you post that. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
okay,
man.
That's today.
Yeah, man, I found a great church and I just absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. And we have a barbecue that we're doing at the church today. And I'm going to go. It's at 6:30. It's like 2 miles from my house too. It's beautiful. And I'm going to, our pastor's been on a mission trip, and he got back not too long ago. And I saw him Sunday and spoke with him a little bit, and shared with him, that I've made the decision that I was going to run for state representative in our area. And he was like, "Michael, that's great." He goes, "Because there's a guy that I want to introduce you to. His name's Paul, I think it is, and he's interested in running for school board."
Yeah.
Sweet. I was like, as former chairman of the GOP, I was like, I'll be more than happy to sit down and talk with him and, kind of lead him in the right way. But, I think this afternoon, at the barbecue, when, we're able to sit down, outside of, church, sanctuary, if you will, during a sermon and, have a little bit deeper dive into this conversation, with the church and what their plans are, to get, a little bit more louder, when it comes to politics, I guess you could say. So it'll be interesting to see what he says, but I can hear it now from some people. They just don't want to do it because they don't want to offend Democrats. Michael Jordan had the ultimate line. It was like people were asking him, "Well, how come you don't talk about politics?" He goes, "Well, because Republicans buy tennis shoes too."
Right. Yeah, they do. Yeah, it's amazing. But again, like you said, with where of course, as you know, the Republican Party is not perfect. There's some major issues there that, of course, we want to see fixed. But of course, as a platform, my goodness, the two platforms between the two parties are night and day. You got at least one. The Republicans are for God, anti-God, for country, anti-country. I mean, this goes on for life, against life. I mean, it goes back and forth all the way down. And so we've got to continue to get beyond that, because if you really care, I mean, really, come on, if you want to use it from an outreach perspective, or you want to see a soul saved, I mean, my goodness, don't you want to tell some poor young woman who's caught in this dilemma of should she abort her child, should she not abort her child? You want to tell her the truth of what the horrible effects of abortion do, not just to her physically, not just to her baby who's being murdered, but the effects she'll have on the rest of her life. These are the truths that have to come out of the pulpit. We just can't sit back and say, well, we're going to let you decide. No, we're here to proclaim the truth. And as for Patriot Church goes, we proclaim it at the intersection of church and state. And that's what we talk about all the time. So Just looking forward to the days ahead. Any way we can help you, brother, please let me know. We'll support you 100% because we want to see great things happen for our state. And we do want to reclaim our state, and we want to make sure that it is set up for the next generation. And that's what it's all about. That's why we fight this good fight. So let me leave you with a couple of quotes, and anything you want to finish up, I'll give you the last word. But it was Charles Finney. We talked about that second great awakening. And during that time, he said, the time has come that Christians must vote for honest men and women, right? And take consistent ground in politics, or the Lord will curse them, he said. God cannot sustain this free and blessed country unless the church will take right ground. And that's what it's all about. We're talking about making that ground holy, right, wherever we go. That ground that Moses was around that burning bush wasn't holy because they had signs around it and marked it off and says, hey, take your sandals off when you walk here. It's holy ground. It was holy because God is holy and God was there. And so when we go places, brother, filled with the Spirit of Jesus, man, we can proclaim that holiness wherever we go. And that's such a great thing. And one last one, this one I remembered when I was there at Battle of Monmouth, because George Washington was coming over to help out at that Battle of Monmouth, because things didn't turn out great when they first started that battle. It was one of the longest battles, they said, time-wise. And General Washington was coming over from Valley Forge and was a great historian. If you haven't read anything about Henry Armit Brown, he's a great historian. He had 100 anniversary times. He used to just go out and remind the kids and the people, talk about the history all the time. And he said this, and this is how I closed Sunday with that fearless pulpit message. He said, danger will not frighten, nor temptation have power to seduce them. Doubt shall not shake their love of country, nor suffering overcome their fortitude. The powers of evil shall not prevail against them, for they are the Continental Army, and these are the hills of Valley Forge. So be encouraged, brother. I know you are, and you know there's stuff that's coming that's going to try to bring you down, but we're going to keep praying for you and lifting you up, and it'll be great days ahead, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. That's a great, I love both of those quotes, but I'm going to ask you if you would, before, after we get off here, if you would send me the first one that you read, because I want to share that with my pastor this evening. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on, John. I really do. God bless you, man, and everything that you do and stand for. I'm so proud of you. I just ask that you guys, pray. Just pray for me. Sure. I know what's coming my way. It's already started, literally not even 24 hours after I announced, you guys already got the phone call. Michael, you don't really know what's coming your way. So I'll share with you, the day after I got that phone call, I got fired from my job. Yeah. How does that work? I announced on Tuesday, I get a phone call on Wednesday. I'm like, no, I'm good. I appreciate it. Yeah, I can show it to work on Thursday and got fired.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay, game on. So we are started, but that's okay. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. The things that I'm advocating for, is for community. It's for, the Lord. I'm not here for me. This job pays $29,000 a year. I mean, it doesn't even pay your bills. Right. But, it's more important to me that we actually have someone who can get out here, and do an honest day's work, without being dictated to by lobbyists, in a party that, doesn't really support you. They support themselves, so it's America first and forever. So I just ask everyone to pray. If you guys, are interested and able to, donate financially, you're more than welcome to. I'd appreciate it. You can go to votemichaelthompson.com, votemichaelthompson.com, and you can make a donation through there. But prayers are the first request.
Yes. Let's go to that votemichaelthompson.com, and it's going to be great, brother. And you keep fighting this good fight, and we won't put up, shut up, or give up, because we're going to keep fighting the good fight. And those who really, they want to complain about us saying America first, but we know true America first people know that it's God first. We know that. And that's what makes America first, is continuing to put God first. That's our history. That's our heritage. And you just keep on fighting that good fight, brother. We've got you lifted up, and anything we need to do, we will help you. So God bless you. Pray this guards your heart and guards your mind, brother, and it keeps you safe as you continue. And God will open great doors for you. And looking forward to great reports and great days ahead.
Yeah, amen. Thank you for having me on.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.